Who contacted you? Who told you to review that film?
No one. I just did it because it looked obscure. I didn't even like the movie. I shouldn't have given such a high score, but reviewing obscure films makes you look smart. And I thought if I looked smart, I would get listeners. My podcast would take off and I could move out of my parents' basement.
What a loser. I'm going to start this video with a mea culpa. Around the release of Control, most of the stuff I read or heard focused on the game's use of ray tracing and very spectacular physics. Thus, I dismissed the game as a tech demo with very little substance. Those of you who played other Remedy games are likely smashing their keyboards right now to write angry messages, particularly when I'll also admit that I didn't play anything else beyond Max Payne from their repertoire. But you can hold on from typing, since after playing Control I have seen the errors of my ways. I expected a third-person action that's very flashy, but what I got was a third-person action with absolutely stunning visuals that are surpassed by the quality of the writing. As you might imagine, I was a bit shocked when I came to this conclusion. The game starts with the protagonist, Jesse Faden, entering the reception of the mysterious Federal Bureau of Control, only to notice that everyone is absent. There's an emergency lockdown currently underway, but she somehow got through without any explanation. All while she's talking to what seems to be an imaginary person right inside her head. Checking things around, you meet a Finnish janitor that talks gibberish and somehow works inside an American governmental building in New York City. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that the hallways have a non-Euclidean geometric layout, preventing you from having a solid grasp of where you're going or where you came from. Continuing forward, you reach the director's office only to notice that he's been shot dead. After grabbing his strange gun at the behest of the mysterious voice inside Jesse's head, you see a flood of bizarre concepts, very vivid imagery of a speaking pyramid, a trip to an unfamiliar environment composed of black rocks and white void. Coming back, you get attacked by men with red glowing lights coming out of them, and the dead director keeps feeding you notions of stuff you have no idea where they could be from. These are the first 5 minutes of the game. I gotta hand it to them, it takes some serious balls to throw so many weird concepts right out of the gate without priming your players at all. Yeah, that's right, 5 minutes and I have so many questions already. It's a powerful hook that I have not seen very often, and it's an early sign of the overall writing quality. To avoid spoilers, I'll just give the general gist of the plot. Mysterious force called the Hiss has invaded the oldest house, the building in which you are currently, and has corrupted anyone who didn't have a special device to protect them. Jessie only arrived here to find her brother taken away by the Bureau many years ago during a traumatic event that will be explained slowly throughout the playthrough. But now she's been put in a situation where she needs to sort out the entire mess. As you make progress, you encounter an incredible array of mysterious concepts. I am frankly very impressed with Sam Blake and his writing team's creativity. Their ability to juggle so many notions in a seemingly harmonious way is not easy to pull off, so they deserve a lot of credit for their work here. You see, the Bureau's job is to handle paranormal phenomena involving so-called altered objects, objects of power, or severe supernatural events labeled as altered world events. Thus, everywhere you go, you run into all sorts of unique and unpredictable situations. Some of the missions involving cleansing or taming said objects are so over the top that I have no idea how someone could come up with them. Believe me that I'm really struggling not to give any of it away because, alongside the main plot, it's something you should see for yourself and soak it in at your own pace. I know it doesn't make for the most exciting video to tell you to play the game if you want to find out more yourself, but I strongly dislike spoiling good writing. Many of the things you come in contact with have a deep inspiration from the horror genre. If you're not a fan of that, you have nothing to worry about, since it doesn't have jump scares or anything of the sort. I'm not a horror fan myself and had no issues with what the game offered. For instance, more knowledgeable people might be able to discuss the Stephen King references that I just caught a glimpse of in more detail than I ever could. But if you're really into horror, Control's a treat without a shadow of a doubt. Being very familiar with Max Payne, I expected another solid character-focused writing style, but it's not really the case here. The bulk of the emphasis is on world building, using a frankly insane array of concepts, and the writers juggle with them to no end. It's true that the initial astonishment you get when you realize the extent of the stuff you're dealing with fades a bit towards the end of the playthrough, but I still felt engaged and wanted to find out more. More importantly, the writing is purposeful. It feels like it peppers you with information at times, but most of everything you hear, see or read builds up towards an excellently crafted world overall. It would have been very easy for the whole house of cards to crumble under the weight of stuff it contains, especially when everything is so outlandish. The fact that everything keeps making sense within the game's logic is commendable. The character building involving the supporting cast remains at high levels concerning its engagement. The more you peel away, the more intriguing nuances you unravel about the characters, revealing complex people with different motivations. I won't lie, hearing James McCaffrey reading his lines is always a treat, but the stuff he and other characters share has genuine depth. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about the main character. Maybe I'm biased since I found her voice acting somewhat poor compared to the rest of the cast. Her lines are blurted out of sync with the general atmosphere, always in a monotonous tone. She's dealing with world-ending events but talks like she's doing chit-chat at the grocery store. She has a lot of questions about everything that's happening around her, but her inquisitiveness doesn't come across when she pokes for answers. The only time I feel her lines work is when she gives sarcastic quips to herself. As for her character, it's as if the writers were undecided between giving her a personality or making her a blank slate, so they went for both and achieved neither. It's a damn shame because it's evident that Remedy can do better. Most of the supporting cast is proof of that. There's also the issue of lip syncing, a prominent issue for a game that relies on dialogue for its story. You see, the character models all look more or less good, but when they start talking, they cross heavily into the uncanny valley territory. Sometimes they look alright, but other times it's as if I'm talking to a ventriloquist dummy. And it's even worse since the character you interact with most is the worst offender. Just look at this, the lips barely touch each other. When it comes to environmental storytelling, Control is hitting very high notes. I mentioned before that the layout of the building is non-Euclidean, but before you witness it with your own eyes, you're given pretty evident clues via the posters that line the walls of the Bureau's office. Many more things are given away with the help of posters and props if you pay attention. They also perform an excellent job in making these places feel inhabited by real people. I love when games do stuff like this since it makes exploration more absorbing and contributes to the desire to find out more about the Aldous house and the Bureau. You might have noticed that everything has a retro look, so if you're into that, there are plenty of fixtures to stare at during your travels. Even if the plot reasoning for that can be labeled as hand-waving, I find it well integrated and never gave me a "well, they just wanted an excuse" vibe. The same kind of praise can be addressed to the expansions, the Foundation and AWE, which are included in the Ultimate Edition. The first gives you the ability to explore the foundation of the Aldous house and provides a very intriguing look into some of the game's crucial plot points. Most post-launch DLCs tend to be more or less afterthoughts, but in this case it provides a meaningful contribution and conclusion to the main story. On the other hand, AWE acts as a bridge between Control and Alan Wake. As I said, I didn't play that game, but seeing how well they nail the atmosphere here gives me further reason to push it higher on my bucket list. So yeah, you can drop the pitchforks for the moment. Both are relatively short compared to the main game, but are undoubtedly worth playing. Their level of quality doesn't drop at all, and it goes to show that for Remedy, these weren't meant just as padding. Even more remarkable is that Remedy managed to make their impressive graphical horsepower work in harmony with the game's brilliant art design. I was afraid that, like with any new graphics features, ray tracing implementation would be gaudy, exaggerated, and clash with the rest of the intended art design. I can safely say that this is not the case. Control is an absolutely gorgeous visual treat. I won't discuss ray tracing at length, since dozens of tech channels can give you more in-depth details about its implementation. But there's something I can't skip over. Beyond the very flashy effects such as reflections and shadows, the most important is, in fact, the indirect diffused lighting. That's because the game makes excellent use of color for its atmosphere, and the slight added touch of colors bouncing off between surfaces goes a really long way. The art design itself is worthy of every praise, and the footage I've used until now is just a glimpse of just how well done Remedy pulled it off. This is one of the rare occasions where eye candy is a very fitting term. The colors, the lighting, the particles, the reflections and the shadows all work in tandem to nail down the atmosphere. I'm only upset that for some reason HDR isn't implemented, because boy oh boy would it have brought a lot to the table. Oh, and by the way, the game with all ray tracing effects enabled at maximum quality runs better than Kingdom Come Lumao. I mentioned at the start of the video that the game's combat is superseded by its writing. Whilst true, it might give a false impression that the gameplay isn't good. But don't worry, Control is loads of fun to play. Initially you only have access to your sidearm, and while okay, the shooting isn't particularly engaging. The real fun starts when you unlock new abilities, particularly the first and most useful one, telekinesis. The game has a robust physics engine and the ability to just pick up almost anything you can set your eyes upon and throw it at your enemies makes for very spectacular fights. As someone who spent hours crashing buildings in the original Crisis, the office spaces in Control are a delightful playground of absolute chaos. Later in the game, when you can dodge, levitate or summon an impromptu telekinetic shield, each fight is visually appealing. They also play a part in the Metroidvania element of the level design. The game's not very difficult, in significant part because of just how powerful telekinesis is. You see, by the end of the game you can essentially spam it against most opponents and use it as the sole source of damage. While it's always really cool to see objects flying around, it can become a bit boring gameplay wise the further down the game you are. It doesn't help that the service gun isn't super powerful even after you put in many upgrades in each variant. I'm also not a fan of having only 2 gun variants available to me at a time. I see no reason why you can't scroll through all of them at once, particularly since you have no use for the number keys on your keyboard. Instead, you're stuck with this sort of clunky menu that requires one click too many for any of its selections. As you might have noticed, the game also has a crafting system. It's not really complex, but it gets the job done. You can collect resources that you spend to access new weapon variants and abilities. You can also take weapon upgrades and personal mods from your dead enemies, and they offer some degree of flexibility. Unfortunately, the inventory system makes for a very tedious experience, mainly since most upgrades and modes are just percentage buffs, and you have to deconstruct so many duplicates. I'm not very impressed by this system, I have to say, but this isn't a detriment either. It's a shame that there's no New Game Plus feature though, since it would have made it more worth it to invest so much time crafting and buying upgrades. In conclusion, Control has been a very satisfying surprise, even if I didn't approach it with low expectations. There's no question that it's a well-made game in all of its aspects, and I certainly look forward to trying out some other Remedy titles in the future just to see what I missed. As I said, the gameplay is good, but not something I'd be overly excited about on its own, even if it provides a gripping visual spectacle at times. But the writing is a solid argument to play the game. It's frankly incredible that you still end up surprised by the creative concepts that keep things fresh until in the end. So, would I recommend it? Well, if you didn't already get it for free on the Epic Store, the game's $40 without any discounts. I'd say that it's sort of worth it for the price, but it offers roughly 35 hours of gameplay if you try to complete as much as you can, and has very little replayability from a gameplay perspective. Its writing might make it worth revisiting to catch the details you might have missed the first time around, but otherwise the game's linear, so don't expect a varied experience. Thanks to everyone for your time. Click the stuff that helps the channel grow and share it with like-minded fellows. Until next time, cheers!